Welcome to Devotionary, where we make the Bible accessible and applicable. What good is a law that goes unheeded? How effective is a regulation that gets ignored? Unless it's obeyed, a law is little more than words on paper, carrying little weight or influence over the lives of men. And Moses knew that the people of Israel were going to be prone to ignoring and disobeying the laws of God. So in Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 1 through 9, we have recorded his call for the Israelites to hear and to heed the law. Obedience was going to be critical to their successful conquest of the land of Canaan. But knowledge of the law was not going to be enough. Head knowledge without a heartfelt desire to apply what you know to how you behave is of little use. Commandments written on stone are of no use if they never make their way into the heart of man. Now this is the commandment, the statutes and the rules that the Lord your God commanded me to teach you, that you may do them in the land to which you are going over, to possess it, that you may fear the Lord your God, you and your son's son, by keeping all his statutes and his commandments, which I command you, all the days of your life, and that your days may be long. Hear therefore, O Israel, and be careful to do them, that it may go well with you, and that you may multiply greatly, as the Lord, the God of your fathers, has promised you, in a land flowing with milk and honey. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your might. And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. Deuteronomy 6, verses 1 through 9. God had given the people of Israel his commands, and every single one of those divine regulations were to be treated with reverence and fear. They were not up for debate, and were to be protected from any form of tampering or alteration. And God had given ample incentive for the people to keep his commands. If the Israelites would obediently and faithfully follow them, they would enjoy the blessings of God. If they chose to disobey them, they would experience very real and painful curses. The very kinds of curses God brought on the Egyptians would fall upon the people of God. But God's commands, while holy, righteous, and just, were nothing more than a set of rules if the people of God refused to hear and obey them. The long list of God-ordained imperatives that Moses had shared with the people was passive and, for the most part, powerless. God's commands could not change anyone. They were intended to regulate human actions and attitudes, but were powerless to change the human heart, from which all human behavior flows. The book of Proverbs has much to say about the heart. Guard your heart above all else, for it determines the course of your life. Proverbs 4, verse 23. Listen, my son, and be wise, and guide your heart on the right course. Proverbs 23, verse 19. Laws, even those given by God, exist outside the human heart, and while they can influence and motivate a man's actions, they cannot alter the true condition of his heart. Jesus himself painted a bleak image of the condition of the fallen human heart. But the words you speak come from the heart. That's what defiles you. For from the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, all sexual immorality, theft, lying, and slander. These are what defile you. Matthew 15, verses 18 through 20. Notice that each item on the list Jesus provides lines up with one of the commands of God. While God had clearly placed prohibitions on murder, adultery, immorality, theft, and lying, it had not resulted in their eradication. Man's sin problem is an internal one and cannot be controlled by externally based rules. No amount of regulations or restrictions on human behavior will ever remedy the problem of sin. God would later say of his own people, "These people say they are mine. They honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me, and their worship of me is nothing but man-made rules learned by rote." Isaiah 29, verse 13. They knew the rules. They could even quote them from memory, but they had a heart problem. And hundreds of years later, Jesus would use this very passage to level a charge of hypocrisy against the religious leaders of his day. He accused them of corrupting the clear commands of God by watering them down with their own set of man-made regulations. You hypocrites! Isaiah was right when he prophesied about you, for he wrote, "These people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. Their worship is a farce, for they teach man-made ideas as commands from God. Matthew 15, verses 7 through 9. So as Moses continued his preparation of the people of Israel to enter the land of promise, he reiterated the necessity for them to treat God's commands with reverence. And he seemed to understand that while he could not change their hearts, he could give them ample motivation to obey God's laws. These are the commands, decrees, and regulations that the Lord your God commanded me to teach you. You must obey them in the land you are about to enter and occupy, and you and your children and your grandchildren must fear the Lord your God as long as you live. If you obey all his decrees and commands, you will enjoy a long life. Deuteronomy 6, verses 1 through 2. If they wanted to enjoy long and prosperous lives, they were going to have to obey God's commands. Moses was making an appeal to their hearts. He was attempting to speak to them as a father and to get them to understand that their decision whether to obey God was going to have long-lasting implications. 2 different times in these verses, Moses states, "Hear therefore, O Israel." The Hebrew word he used is shema, and it carries the idea of hearing or listening, but with the intent to obey. Verse 4 begins with the same phrase, "Hear, O Israel," and then continues with the words, "The Lord our God, the Lord is one." Verses 4 through 9 came to be known as the Shema prayer, and was prayed daily by the Hebrew people. In fact, on one occasion, Jesus was approached by a scribe who asked him, "Which commandment is the most important of all?" Mark 12, verse 28. And Jesus responded by quoting the Shema prayer. "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength." Mark 12, verse 29. Hearing and obeying are inseparable partners when it comes to God's laws. It's not enough to hear what God commands. He demands obedience. And notice that God expects that obedience to flow from the heart. It's to be an obedience based on love and obeisance. There is to be an obedience that flows from a reverent awe of God and a passionate desire to please Him for all that He has done. And Moses made it clear that the law of God was not to be seen as some external list of rules regulating behavior. But he told the Israelites, "These words that I command you today shall be on your heart." Deuteronomy 6, verse 6. They were to become a permanent part of their daily lives. The Israelites were to teach them to their children. They were to surround themselves with God's commands, allowing His holy code of conduct to permeate every area of their lives. While men tend to view all laws as restrictive in nature, the 10 Commandments were to be seen as coming from a loving God who knew what was best for His children. He wasn't trying to be a cosmic killjoy, arbitrarily limiting the behavior of His people. He was providing them with a divine list of carefully crafted rules that were meant to improve their lives, not inhibit their joy. Moses wanted the people to hear what God was saying, but more importantly, he wanted them to apply the words of God to their hearts so that their behavior would flow from the inside out. When Moses said, "Hear, O Israel," he was calling them to carefully discern the intent behind God's laws and to see them as expressions of His love for them. If the people of Israel could grasp just how much God loved them, they would be more prone to return that love with all their heart, soul, and might. But if all they heard was a list of restrictive rules, they would tend to respond in disobedience, or at best, a heartless obedience lacking in love and marred by hypocrisy.